Do you know who was the first black president of North America? He wasn't Obama. He was actually Mexican. And he was the second president of Mexico. And he was president in 1829. And his name was Vicente Guerrero. Now, if you aren't familiar with that, you likely aren't familiar with the impact that Afro-Mexicans have had on Mexican culture, music, and identity. So today we're going to be taking a look at a side of Mexican culture that has often been neglected. And I hope you enjoy.
¿Qué onda? Soy Sebastián y este podcast es Otomi. For all of my non-Spanish native speakers, this is Sebastian and I'm a high school student in the Bay Area. I've got the facts and the opinions. Join me as we discuss topics of society, culture, identity, education, and life.
An integral part of the founding of Mexico has always been the African population that has always been present but is often overlooked. And so if we're going to start talking about the history of Afro-Mexicans, it's important to notice that Mexico was a slave trading country. Mexico had 200,000 principally West African slaves that were brought in, and they mostly outnumbered the Spanish colonists for many decades. And for some time, Mexico was the country with the most slaves in all of the Americas. So now we're going to be discussing a bit the role of these slaves, these black slaves from Africa who were brought in. And their role here was actually somewhat different from what is seen as the conventional role of slaves when they came to the Americas. The African slaves are actually used as foremen. They oversaw the indigenous peoples, and they were the ones who were there pushing the indigenous peoples to do the laborious tasks. Most of the slaves were men. So naturally, most of them were married with the indigenous people. So the grand majority of people who speak about Mexico and the racial diversity within Mexico consider mestizo populations and the indigenous populations. Basically, that mixture of European and indigenous, if you forgot what mestizo means. And due to that, a lot of the time, the African history and ancestry has been diluted, and a lot of people don't even think about it, even though it's an integral part of Mexican history. And one of the reasons is that there were a lot of mixed race offspring. I just said how the majority of the African slaves who were men married the indigenous women, right? So due to that, as generations pass, there's more mixing, and the percentage of that African ancestry decreases each time. And that is something that's important to know, because in fact, the majority of Mexicans have African ancestry, a specific percentage of African ancestry. It varies, just like the percentage of Native American ancestry varies with each individual. The percentage of ancestry coming from Europe, they all vary. And the majority of these people who I'm referring to are individuals who have ancestry, or at least families that have lived in Mexico for many, many generations. Because recent immigrants aren't going to have been really affected by that racial mixing that takes generations to occur. And due to negative connotations that are placed often on the African population, there a lot of people deny their African ancestry, especially in Mexico, because there's a lot of racism against black people in Mexico, just like much of the world. And much of after the Mexican Revolution, and just increasingly, the sense of pride of being Mexican has been placed on the indigenous and the European aspect, and that combination of races, rather than the very prevalent African contributions. And as we see in our beautiful flag, one of the most beautiful flags of the world, what I really love about the Mexican flag is just that it symbolizes that Mexican ancestry, that indigenous ancestry of the Mexica, and all of these, basically who we are, our roots. And that's something that's really beautiful about the flag. And I believe it was voted the most beautiful flag in the world at some point. And it's beautiful because it has just such significant history. And I'm happy that we were able to adopt a flag like this instead of doing something that was purely colonial and dominated by Spaniard, those colonizers, those conquistadores who came and really took everything and destroyed a lot of our heritage and ancestry. This flag is able to somewhat ameliorate the situation and allow us to continue acknowledging our ancestry. Even though some people deny it, we still have that ancestry and we're aware of it. And so not until recently have Afro-Mexicans really been recognized, even by Mexico. The option for Negro, or black, in Mexico on the census didn't actually ever occur until 2015. Before that, there was no actual consideration of the Afro-Mexican population. And this is a good step in the right direction. In Chile is the only country that in Latin America that does not actually recognize the black population, even though there too there's a black population, like most of Latin America, because of the prevalence of slaves. So now if we're going to look at Afro-Mexicans from a modern era, a lot of the Afro-Mexicans who are primarily Afro-descendant, so because again, we talked about that, the majority of Mexicans are actually mixed with African ancestry, but at varying degrees. When it comes to, because of that mixing, that over generations, it just amplified and the percentage decreased. And the amount of, primarily African individuals diminished almost entirely. However, Mexico has been it has had a good number of non-mixed race black individuals who are immigrants, recent immigrants, either from the Caribbean or from Africa. And one example would be Lupita Nyong'o, who a lot of people are familiar with. Many people don't know that she was born in Mexico. She was born in Mexico, but she lived in Kenya. I believe she moved pretty quickly after she was born in Mexico to Kenya. Nonetheless, she is Mexican, and Mexico has had a good number of African immigrants moving in. And Mexico does have its own Afro-Mexican populations that have been here for generations. And primarily these are located in Veracruz and Guerrero. Of course, Veracruz was where the first slaves arrived, right there in the Gulf of Mexico, Veracruz. That was the first African colonial colony with primarily slaves. Remember, Mexico right now, currently, modern day Mexico, has one of the highest Afro-Latino populations in all of Latin America. And if you go to these states, Guerrero, Oaxaca, they tend to be poorer states. And that also correlates with higher indigenous populations in those states as well. So they tend to be poor states, and that's unfortunate. And a lot of the time, connotations of poverty can be associated with Afro-Mexican descent and identity, and for that reason, many individuals who do have African ancestry prefer to decline it and suppress it just because they feel shame from it. So in Mexican history, there have been some Afro-Mexican figures who are just huge. They've had a huge impact on the culture and on society. And we could start off with in 1609. So this is long, long ago, right? Hernán Cortés arrived in 1521 to Tenochtitlan, where the Mexica had their whole civilization in Tenochtitlan, and it was destroyed, and the Spanish began to colonize everything. And now 1609, there have already been slaves who have been brought in to Veracruz, and in this one colony with many African slaves near Veracruz. And this was a maroon settlement. Basically, it was composed by descendants of Africans from the Americas. And there was one individual who kind of led this group, and his name was Gaspar Yanga. And Gaspar Yanga, he was African. So he was the leader of the maroon colony of slaves near Veracruz. And as leader of this maroon settlement of slaves, he basically he successfully defended against, well, his colony successfully defended against the Spanish who attacked them in 1609. Now, this resistance to the Spanish is clearly it's something that is significant, and in Mexican society, it's something that's been recognized as a resistance to those conquistadores and something that's been honorable. And in 1618, Yanga, he had an agreement with the colonial government for self-rule of this maroon settlement. And the settlement became known as San Lorenzo de los Negros. Now, in modern-day Mexico, the settlement that he formed is called Yanga in his name, in his honor. And Yanga, actually, in the 19th century, he was named the national hero of Mexico, a national hero of Mexico, and el primer libertador de las Américas. That was the official title that they gave him. Because think about it, 1609, that was long ago, long before Mexico got its independence. And he definitely was a Mexican hero, and he was African. And we can't forget things like that. He's definitely an important person in Mexican history. And now we're going to move on to the next person, who is Vicente Guerrero. Now, this one's a lot better known. A lot more people know about this. But Vicente Guerrero, he basically was one of the leaders, the military leaders in the War for Independence against the Spaniards. And he was an Afro-Mestizo. And in this War of Independence, he was significant in fighting, helping fight the war, just as many other Afro-Mexicans were. And as an Afro-Mestizo, there are connotations that may have come with that, but he was actually the second president of Mexico. In 1829, he became president. And as president, Vicente Guerrero was actually he was the second president of the Republic of Mexico. And he was also the first black president in all of North America. And now the first black head of state was in the Caribbean. In the Caribbean was Jean-Jacques Dessalines, who many of us are familiar with as well, in Haiti. And he became the first governor general of the independent Republic of Haiti in 1804. Nonetheless, this was significant. Think about it. Mexico, a country that many people know for having its strong indigenous and European roots. A lot of people overlook, though, the fact that Africans are just extremely essential to the culture, to the history. They were impactful in the revolution, in the war for independence. And clearly, our second president he was African. He was Afro descendant. So that says something. Of course, one of the states with the highest Afro-Mexican populations in all of Mexico is Guerrero, which of course is named after Vicente Guerrero. So he's been honored in those ways as well, and he has been given some recognition for his African ancestry. But yeah, he's a sense of pride for Afro-Mexicans all over. Now, if we're going to talk about cultural influences, Mexican cuisine has just been really influenced by African culture significantly. The use of peanuts. Now, my personal favorite, plantains, which I love to eat, what my mom calls plátanos machos, which are the fried plantains. I know that they have in like every single Latin American country, there's a different name for fried plantains, but the way my mom was raised, when they ate it, it was called plátanos machos. And then also fruits like cassava, malanga, sweet potatoes, things like that. They came from Africa, and they have significantly impacted the cuisine in coastal areas in basically so many different ways. And that's something to be cognizant that when we're consuming these foods, it of course was part of that Columbian exchange of disease, food, and peoples, but that has helped form the culture that we know today as Mexican culture. And now there also is a lot of an African legacy when it comes to music and dances. Veracruz has a style of music that is called jarocho, I believe. And this style of music it can be seen in the song called La Bamba. And a lot of people know La Bamba, right? But they don't know that it's an actual African song. It originates from African slaves in Veracruz who would sing it when they were working in the fields. And a lot of people don't know that. But that just reveals the fact that a lot of this history has been whitewashed. And we need to recover it and know the raw natural forms of what constitutes them, their history, their etymology, because that is part of the beauty of the culture, of the music, of the dance. Now, there are other dances too, such as La Danza de los Diablos, which they dance in Costa Rica. They wear these big masks with beards, and it's something really, really interesting, and I think it resembles a lot of that mixture of African religion and African culture with the other European and indigenous cultures. And this is something that occurs a lot in the Costa Chica. And if you think about it, those communities have developed their own culture and identity over the generations that they've lived there. And that's something that I think that is interesting as well. And also, there's there are a good set of instruments that are played in Latin America, but in Mexico specifically, there are instruments played, at least in these areas like La Costa Chica, that are Afro-Mexican. They they come from Africa. One of them is La Guijada, which is a percussive instrument made from the jawbone of a donkey. Now, you might think this is really strange, but I've seen these before. It's fascinating, and it's part of the culture, and something you have to both respect and admire, because it's been able to be passed on and it still be part of the culture. And now, the way that many Afro-Mexicans have been reclaiming what's theirs and their origins and their culture has been through dance. Dance, of course, has always been an expression of emotion, culture, history, story. You can tell so much through dance. You can talk about oppression. You can talk about struggles. And this is a form of cultural and emotional expression that has allowed a lot of Afro-Mexicans to indulge in what really is theirs. Now, an example of this would be the Oaxacan Obatala dance, which I was introduced through to Obatala in actually through Brazilian music and some samba culture. What some of the music I was listening to, it has Obatala in the title. And if you don't know what Obatala is, Obatala is an orisha, and in Latin America he's known as Obatala. In Brazil, Oxalá. And if you don't recall, last episode we talked about candomblé and the religions that have sprouted from a mix of Catholicism and African religions, Yoruba religions. Now, the fact is that candomblé is a mixture of these religions, but the orishas are of African origin. So they're not restricted just to candomblé. A lot of these people who are Afro-Mexican, they believe in Obatala also. And these orishas, who are these deities that are believed by individuals of African descent. And honestly, at this point, anyone could be of any religion. It's just the origin of these beliefs is African. Thus, we will conclude. I'm trying to make the episodes a little bit shorter just so that they're easier to digest. I know that a lot of people are busy, and making them longer, I do like to put in as much information as I can into these podcasts, just so that it's easier to, just so that you learn more and get more information from them. I do think also it may be more appealing if I cut it up into smaller pieces for you. So yeah, I'm going to be making these a little shorter, more concise. I'm not going to elaborate too much in certain things. But of course, as you heard today, I still get into some pretty good details about these parts of, culture and identity as a Mexican. When it comes to my identity as a Mexican, there's so many things I could talk about. But really, I've been cutting it down into different pieces. Here we're talking about Afro-Mexican pride, Afro-Mexican religions, Afro-Mexican culture, and the way they've impacted us and through history and through music. There's so many different topics that I can talk about, but I'm going to try to divvy it up into different groups. And that's my goal. Thank you all, and enjoy the rest of your October.